Impact Interview is sponsored by the Pocono Mountains, where small-town charm meets big adventures. Book your trip today by visiting PoconoMountains.com.
Well, welcome back. Time for our Impact Interview. He had so much fun during his appearance on last year's show. He couldn't wait to come back. A Penn State All-American at defensive tackle, NFL linebacker for 12 years, won 4 Super Bowls with 3 different teams, the Raiders, San Francisco, and Washington. NFL analyst for Fox Sports, 7 years as the CEO of the Detroit Lions. I could go on and on. Now a college football analyst on ESPN and now the Big Ten Network. And just happens to be with us for today's show. Matt Millen, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, not a problem. Good to be here, guys.
Okay, so look, you're never shy about sharing your thoughts, and we're looking forward to touching on a bunch of college football topics. But let's start with the Nittany Lions and the Scarlet Knights. Rutgers 4-6, but they led Michigan at the half. Tight games with Nebraska and Michigan State. So how close is this program to taking another step, and what problems can this year's team present for Penn State?
Well, they still have ways to go in terms of closing the talent gap. And I think across all of college football right now, in fact, I've had this conversation with a lot of the head coaches in the Big Ten, the hardest thing to recruit and to develop is the offensive line. And so I think that's right now, that's where they're kind of struggling, is in the offensive line. They have a good young quarterback. They did have a really good young running back. He got hurt. But Kyle Monangai, their running back now, is not a bad player. He's actually a pretty good player. If they can give the kid some time and if the game can slow down a little bit, they get some protection, I think he can throw the football against Penn State, although Penn State's defense, I think, is the strength of their team. In particular, I think their back seven. I think they're pretty darn good. So I think this is a game that Penn State should win, and it's also one of those games that they're going to have to play. They can't overlook this Rutgers team, because if there's one thing Greg Schiano is really good at, he can turn a game into a fight really fast, and they'll get a lot to be. There's a lot to be bargained for there. But if you do what you're supposed to, Penn State's a better football team.
Well, you mentioned Greg Schiano. It seems that he's made progress on defense and the skill positions, the special teams. Touching on what you just talked about, how hard is it for teams to make that jump in the trenches and a quarterback to close the gap with those upper echelon teams?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, Jay. I think the big thing there is it's where your starting point is, right? I mean, when you stop and think about it, they have a left tackle there at Rutgers who was a walk-on, and now he's a big kid. He's just it takes a long time to be able to develop into a good tackle. Tackles are tough to come by anyway. So it's just one of those things. I think that's an indicator of where they're at down there. He's trying to mix and match as much as he can. I think 2 of his starters, the center was a defensive tackle last year rather, and the right guard is also a defensive player. So he's trying to develop them, and when you're changing over that fast, it takes time. The quarterback, though, is legit. The quarterback is going to be a good player. This is only maybe his 3rd start, I think. But I think what he can do is he sees the field. He is athletic. He can run. He has a good arm. It's still too fast for him. You understand that 100%, especially developing young kids. It takes time. And so this is his 2nd year that he's down there, but it's his 1st year playing. And so it's going to take some time. Penn State's secondary, along with, Chop Robinson, I think does a good job coming off the edge. And I like what the heck's the kid? He was a freshman, Danny something, Denny, or what the heck his name is. There's too many Dannys in his name.
Hey.
But that kid's a good player as well. And I also think the young freshman linebacker coming off the edge, Abdul Carter, I think he plays off the ball a little bit sometimes, but when he does come, he's effective. So they've got some good players over there. I think the talent level is a little bit too much for Rutgers.
Matt, great seeing you, my friend. Always is. Hey, speaking of the trenches, as you look at Michigan, they seem to have made an old school commitment to old school Michigan football. With everyone else playing so much spread offense, how much of a challenge does it become for teams to prep for Michigan's smash mouth approach in 1 week of practice?
That is a great question. And let me just say this. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. That's the first thing. That doesn't mean they win, right? When they beat Ohio State, I think they're more physical, and I think they got more talent over there on the defensive side. I don't know about the offensive side. But having said that they went back old school, and they are physical. And when they're the only team in the conference that's trying to be physical on defense, that's tough for offenses. They catch some teams off guard. They don't play a soft scheme. So when I say they're coming downhill, they come downhill, and they will smack you face first right in the chin. And for this, here's what's happening in football. And this is all across the board, from Little League football in high school and college into the pros. It's a different iteration. It's a completely different game than what we played when all of us here in this conversation were playing. And what it's done is so the rules have changed, right? And they're trying to take the head out of the game. And then with the advent of with the RPO and all that, teams are playing a little deeper. You're playing from top down a little bit. And so there's not as much physicality at the point. So when they start saying, come up and you're two-gap a guy, or you're going to come in, you're going to get into a guy, there's no strike. People play with their hands. You can't strike somebody with your hands. Michigan has gone back to the old school. They'll strike you with their face and hands. Big difference. You can shock with your head. You can shock with face and hands. You can't shock with just hands. And so they're catching teams off guard because they're stopping them. Like, they will come up and when I say downhill, I'm talking at the line of scrimmage stuff. They will come up, scrap, and they will just stone people. And I mean, it is fun to watch guys just get jacked, and they get off balance, and they're good at getting off the blocks and making plays. So I think that's been their key to success, is just being physical.
By the way, Matt, Scrap's going to let us know that. Did you hear Matt say that was a great question that I asked?
I like number 55. Come on.
It's really changed a bunch in college football. I mean, across all the levels of the game. And every time rules change, the game changes, right? It has to. But there's two things that haven't changed as these different iterations of the game have come along, and that's this: smart players win, and toughness wins. And right now, I think Michigan is playing with those two elements better than anybody else.
Well, look, and it's always fun to kind of play the what-if game. Considering the level of discipline that your coach in college, Coach Paterno, had in his program, how do you think his approach might have changed, if any, if the transfer portal had existed back then?
So here's the thing that I know. It's just like players, right? Smart players are your best players. Smart coaches are your best coaches. And when you have your best coaches, you start talking about people who know how to adapt to what's going on. I don't think Coach would have had a problem at all. I think Joe would have been on top of this. I know that what he would have been able to do is, especially because I know his standing in the Big Ten, he would have seen it coming. He would have gotten ahead of it. I think the first thing he would have tried to do was try to say no to it, because he could see further out to see, we got a problem. It's because there's a problem right now in college football, and they can't stop the monster they're creating, because it's out of control. Back in the day, they used to control it, and they used to try to hide it. Now you can't hide it. It's out of control. So I think he would have tried on the front end to at least try to legislate it, and now it's out of the bag, and they're trying to pull it back in, and you can't. It's hard to do. So I think given that, he would have gotten on board with this, and he would have been in the middle of it, trying to do it the right way. Probably I don't even know what they're trying to do. They're trying to do a collective, I believe, up there at Penn State. I think Coach would have been ahead of that. He was always ahead of things. So I don't think that part was the problem. It still would have come down. It would have been interesting to see how he would have adapted to today's rule changes and how the game is played today, because the RPOs and stuff, it's just different. It's a different way of playing football. But he would have adapted. Like I said, the great ones always do.
So talking about the era that we're in now, with the current era of name, image, likeness, thought we'd have a little what-if fun with you. When you were at Penn State, besides Harley Davidson, what other companies would you have wanted to do an NIL deal with?
You know what, Jay? I probably would have been good in the porta potty business. I think that for all the crap that I was talking, I would have been perfect for that.
So along those lines, what kind of companies do you think would have signed some of your teammates like Tom Bradley, Mike Gooman, or Irv Pankey?
Well, let's see. Tom Bradley would have definitely been a scrapyard, because that just goes right with it, right? There's a scrap pack and everybody else. Mike Gooman, that's an interesting one. Mike was an All-American boy. He did everything right by the book. I know because I was his roommate, and I did everything not by the book. So I don't know. He would have been some kind of All-American company. I don't know what it was. And who was the third one you said?
Irv Pankey.
Oh, Irv always had something going on. I think he already had a nil deal back then. Those days. Irv's a great man. Great player too. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just interesting how things have changed, and like I said, it's moving forward. It's going to continue to do that. I just believe that the NCAA's got to get ahead of this nil thing right now, because right now they're behind.
Hey, speaking of this modern era, in your opinion, how much easier or harder is it to assemble a roster in this era of college football now?
Todd, I hate to disappoint you, but that's another great question.
Thank you.
No, it is because it's complicated now. It's complicated because of the transfer portal, and I think there's one good thing that has come out of that, and I think Penn State's doing a good job of it, right? And that is they're playing a lot of players. So it's not like now when you're a starter as a defensive lineman or a linebacker or whatever, your backup is not going to get in. That's the way it used to be. You just played till the game was out of hand, and then the backups came in. Now it's not that way. Now you're rolling guys through, and you're trying to keep people fresh, but you're playing people. And I think that's a positive on one hand. From the player perspective, I never liked that, because I believe that as you play in the game, you get a feel for the guy you're going against, and I'll know if I tried something in the first quarter that I thought I could get, I'm not going to use it again to probably the third quarter, and then I'm going to pair it with something else and I can beat him. And then I just get a feel what he can do and what he can't do. He's getting weaker on me, or he's getting stronger, or whatever the case may be. You get a feel for how the game is going on, and if you adapt to it, I think you benefit from it. So I think there's pluses and minuses to it. I just think it's just something you just have to adapt to.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Hey, one other thing before you get out, before we let you go. You had mentioned some things have already like they let out of the bag, right? There's no kind of rolling some things back. The playoff coming up really changes the way the last couple weeks of a season are, right? I mean, they've already kind of, the bowl system is kind of not what it used to be, that type of deal. But you're looking at a Penn State team now that has no chance really of winning the Big Ten championship. They're talking about next year, that kind of stuff, what kind of bowl game. But in a couple of years, they're sitting at 11, Matt, and they're talking about potentially going to Tennessee in the first round. You know what I mean? That kind of situation. What are your thoughts on the 12-team playoff? What does it do for the game? Do you like it, not like it, that type of deal? What's your thoughts on it?
It was inevitable. I think Jay and I remember having this conversation with you, Jay. This is probably maybe 3 years ago, right? We talked about it when they first came out. When this more than that actually, because we just talked about when they went to the 4, and I think we both said that wasn't enough. I remember I was talking about it. So I thought 8 at the time when they were doing 4, but 12 I think makes the most sense. It gives you that underdog piece that could there's going to be a team that's going to be the 12th seed that eventually is going to win the whole thing, right? It's going to happen eventually. So you just got to see. I think it's good for the game. I think they're going to have to make some adjustments for it because you can't be playing into April. But it's probably the right way to go. You just have to adjust to it. That's all.
Anything else, guys?
No.
I do
fun is
have
over.
something
All
for
right,
him.
Scrap's got something.
You know, Matt, you were talking about playing the game, and I'm not going to
Yep.
tell you the player, but he told me I hated playing against Millen because he would watch me and he'd know if I had too much weight on my fingers, sitting back in my stance, he would say, "Oh, you're getting ready to pass block, I can tell." You know? And that's from being in the game, like you said, playing a lot of plays, you get to know your opponent.
Absolutely. And, I think, Scrap, that's kind of a lost. You remember, you guys don't remember him, but he was before us coming in, but he was a real good friend of mine, Dennis Onkotz.
Oh, yeah.
So Dennis Onkotz was an All-American, two-time All-American, and also an academic All-American from Northampton, Pennsylvania, up for Penn State. He was a second-round pick of the Jets. And I got to be pretty good friends with Denny. And Denny told me, as a linebacker, this was something I never forgot, and he was 100% right. He said you have to use all of your senses when you're playing. And I said, okay, so I understand sight. That's the easy one. He said, you got to listen, you got to see, you got to feel. Everything, every one of your senses you have to use when you're playing. And he said, the biggest thing is, your sense of feel, is he's talking about balance and, guy trying to take an edge on you and all that kind of stuff. When you get, it's almost like wrestling. It's almost like wrestling, that part, the physical part of it. But you have to listen, keep your ears open because things sound different. The difference between play action and a run game is the sound of the play, right? You can hear it. And so I never forgot that. And then years later, Bad Rad, Dan Radakovich, he was in Pittsburgh, and we were going to team up to do some kind of a tape series for something. He asked me to be part of it. And I sat with him, and I was just fascinated. He reiterated exactly what Dennis had said years before, and then he expanded it and really made a ton of sense. And I never forgot that, because that's a really good piece of information to file and keep in your head. And if you're aware of it, you can use it. If you're unaware of it, it just falls into the other side, and you never use it. So really good. I think you win this one tonight, Scrap. It was 3 good points.
That's the first time I've won against you in a long time.
Awesome. Hey, Matt, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Anytime, guys. Good to talk to you. Take care of yourselves.
Take care.
Say
Thanks,
hey to
Matt.
your mom, Jay. Say hey to mom.
Will do. Thanks.
You got it.
All right,
Yeah,
take care.
Bye.